Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Today we're going to do an updated review video of the Lenovo Legion Go. It's been about 6 months at this point, and I always like to check in these devices around this time frame just to see how everything is going. And we have seen quite a few updates from Lenovo as well as the community, although to be honest, most of the updates have come from the community at this point. Now we're going to break up this video into 3 different chunks. The first is going to be some of the things that I've acclimated to or appreciated about the Legion Go in my time with it. So for example, maybe I was lukewarm about one of their features, but now I've grown to like it, so we'll talk about that. For the second part, I want to talk about all of the things that I've had to physically do to the Legion Go in order to make me appreciate it more. That can be things like improving the controls or the audio, or even some of the video settings as well. So we'll go over each of those tips and tricks. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with some of the things I think that Lenovo could do to enhance the device even further. Some of these are things that just the community wouldn't be able to do themselves, and so we need help from Lenovo to make this thing better. And I think it's perfect timing because we're just starting to hear about the new ROG Ally that's going to be coming out later this year. It's going to be called the Ally X. And I would say that the Ally X is more of a refresh than anything. It has the same chip and screen, but everything else has been improved, including the battery. And so I'm excited to see that, and we will probably hear a lot about it in the coming months. So I think it's a great time to figure out a new baseline for the Legion Go and see how it stacks up against all the other competition. Anyway, if you are interested in handheld PCs at all, or the Legion Go specifically, I think you'll find a lot of good nuggets in here. And so without any further delay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's jump right in and start talking about the things that I like about this device. Some of these things I liked before and just like better now, but others are things that are a little bit more unexpected. One of those are the haptics. Now, I remember the rumble being pretty good on these, but the more I played it, the more I appreciated it. Now, I'm keeping these at just like the default medium settings, and that seems to be the perfect amount. It's almost like they're more subtle than other devices. They have a bit of a more high-pitched register to them, as opposed to like a low rumble. And so I really like that feeling. It doesn't feel like the control is like shaking in my hands, but rather I'm just getting like a nuanced touch feedback. One of the best examples is Animal Well. This game just came out. It's a Metroidvania style game. I'm really enjoying it. And this one, every time that you jump and then land, you get a little bit of a like boop kind of like haptic feedback. And it feels really natural and nice. And so this is a control scheme that I don't really remember much when I did my initial testing, but now that I've played it against other devices, I've decided that I really like the haptics here. Another thing that I like about the device are the face buttons. Now, I liked these face buttons in my previous reviews, I remember that, but I just like them a lot more. Maybe it's because I've been testing a bunch of other devices where maybe the face buttons weren't the best, but these just feel really punchy. They have a rubber membrane connection, but have a really nice tactile feedback. A good example is going to be when playing Hades. So this is a game where I just mash on the face buttons most of the time, and I found it to be a perfect fit for this game. In fact, it's one of my favorite ways to play Hades right now. Another thing I've come to like even more about the Legion Go is that big screen. This thing is 8.8 inches with a 16:10 aspect ratio and a 1600p resolution. This just gives you so many different options. You can play it in tabletop mode. You can even play games that have like small little text. It's going to look fine here. Now, most of the time I don't play it in 1600p just because that requires a lot of power to push that many pixels, but having a 1600p resolution gives us a lot of other scaling options, which we'll talk about later in this video. Another thing that comes with having a larger screen is the ability to have larger controls, and I've always felt that this device is pretty roomy, but I don't know, after comparing it against other devices over the past few months, it just feels even roomier, especially when we use some of the 3D printed grips that we'll talk about later in this video. The control scheme and just the overall feel of this device is just super comfortable. It doesn't feel like a compromise when it comes to size, as opposed to other handhelds that might feel a little bit cramped. So in particular, if you have larger hands, I think this is a really great fit. Another physical characteristic that I really like about the Legion Go is the battery life. So this has a 49 or 49.2 watt hour battery, and that will give you, depending on the performance profile, at least an hour and 45 minutes, worst case scenario, and then it'll get better from there depending on that profile. And so I love the idea of being able to play this at a full 20 watt TDP to really push that performance as much as you can, but still getting a good hour and 45 minutes of gameplay out of that. It's right at that spot of x86 handheld where I don't really worry about the battery life, because if I put it in like power saving mode, I can get 3, even 4 hours of gameplay out of this device, even though it has a huge screen. And so I've really liked just that whole experience of being able to play this for a good chunk of time compared to other handhelds. So those are all the physical characteristics about the Legion Go that I really like, but there are a couple software related things that have been updated or just are things that I appreciate. So the first is going to be that they've updated the Legion Space app a couple times over the past 6 months, and one of those has been a pretty significant one for my own quality of life. What they've done is they've changed it out so that the menu buttons or the hotkey buttons up top no longer are the Legion Space buttons, but you can actually map them to be the select and start buttons. And for me, that was a big deal when I first was reviewing this device, because my hands just naturally wanted to go up there for select and start, much like how it is on other devices like the Nintendo Switch. So what they've done is they've swapped that out. So now the buttons on the bottom left, which typically were supposed to be used for select and start, can now be swapped around, and that makes it so much easier. Not only does it make the select and start buttons easier to press, but then also the menu buttons, the Legion Space buttons, those you're not going to use as often. And so I like the fact that they're kind of pushed away into a corner. And I feel like this has a secondary effect in that the Legion Space app kind of gets out of your way. It's no longer in the forefront. Because you have to physically put your thumb down to actually press the button and bring it up, it just becomes more of an afterthought. And that's the way I want this front end software to work. I want to just jump into my games. I don't want to have to go through the Legion Space menu if I don't want to. So it makes it really great if I want to open up the sidebar to be able to change out like the TDP or maybe the screen brightness. But then if I don't want to even worry about it, I can just forget it completely. And I think that's awesome. Another thing I've come to appreciate are the different power profiles. I think they work really well on the Legion Go. Some of this comes from the fact that I had just spent a bunch of time testing the MSI Claw, and I was pretty unhappy with how everything was calibrated there. When I went back to the Legion Go, it felt like a breath of fresh air. There are 3 different modes. You have your quiet and balanced and performance modes. The quiet mode will give you around an 8-watt TDP, balance will be around 15 watts, and then performance will be 20 watts. Now each of these will go up as you plug the device in, but that's usually kind of the amount that you can think about when it comes to the power profile. And I found that these 3 profiles really match up to the way that I like to play. I usually will keep it in the balance mode just because that will give me about 2+ hours of battery life, but then also if I really want to push it, I can go and do the performance mode. Say I've only got an hour to play, I might as well play in the best mode possible. But then also if I want to play like a lightweight game and I'm going to play it for a longer stint, I can throw it into that quiet mode, and it just seems to be perfectly balanced. There's never been a time where I felt like, oh man, I can't find the right setting. There's a manual setting, I could always do that myself, but I found that the 3 defaults seem to work pretty well for most games. I also like that right there on the front menu, they have the OS power mode options. What I usually will typically do is keep this on the efficiency option. This means that you'll have a better balance between the CPU and GPU power profiles. But then also if I'm going to be doing something more CPU intensive like emulation, I can throw it into the performance mode, and that's going to enhance that performance there. And so it does kind of give you the best of both worlds, and I love the fact that I can just access it from the quick menu right then and there. And so yeah, that's a quick summary of all the things I've really started to like about the Legion Go a little bit more than before. Some of these are hardware things that I've just come to appreciate and acclimate myself to, and then others have been things that Lenovo have done to enhance the experience. However, there have been other things that I think can be improved with the Legion Go, and for some of these I had to take matters into my own hands. So let's go over each of those. Let's start with the controls. I talked about these quite extensively in my reviews, but I never really liked the flat feeling of the front of those controllers. It just felt like it was a little bit too cornered off, and so it had a bit of a sharp feeling in my palm, and it just didn't feel very comfortable. One of the things that I had hoped is that Lenovo would make new controller attachments to it. I even tried to talk to them about that at CES earlier this year. They weren't really interested in talking to me at the time. They had a lot of other products that they were releasing, so they weren't really in Legion Go mode at that point. And so unfortunately, I wasn't able to convey some of those things, but luckily the community has really stepped up and provided better solutions. So there are 4 different 3D printed things that I've bought from Etsy over the past few months, and these have really enhanced my gameplay experience. The first are what they call comfort grips. And essentially, these are just controller covers that you will snap into place. They do make it a little bit more bulky, but it actually feels very comfortable, and then it smooths out those corners that I always had issues with. And so the installation process is super simple. You just snap them into place, and the materials here are pretty nice. They even have like a bumpy texture on the back. Now, when you look at these comfort grips, it looks like, okay, they're just a little bit of a bumper or a lip around the edges of it, but they've been perfectly crafted. So they're nice and soft and rounded, and your whole hand will rest on those parts, so it feels cohesive with the entire controller. And it's one of those things where it's hard to convey just how good of an improvement this actually is. I would even go as far as to say it is transformative. It went from the point where every time that I picked up the Legion Go, I was like, gosh, I wish they would make new controllers, to the point where I just don't even think about it anymore. I pick it up and go, man, this is a good device. And considering the fact that I was so lukewarm about this device in general before, and now I look forward to picking it up all because of these like 20-something dollar grips, is kind of an amazing experience. Another complaint I had about the Legion Go is that there are a bunch of buttons on it all over the back and whatnot, and I would always press these accidentally. And even though they are turned off when you're just playing it in handheld mode, it was always very distracting because I felt like, oh, I'm pushing this button. Even though it's not doing anything, it felt like I was messing up. Now, with these comfort grips, they cover up those buttons. You can still press on them if you need to, but they're a lot harder to press down on. It means that you have to be a little bit more deliberate. And as a result, you won't press them accidentally. And so even though these comfort grips do a lot of great things when it comes to just the overall roundedness and just the feel of it, it also enhances it in that regard as well, in the sense that I'm not accidentally pressing these buttons. It now feels like a cohesive handheld. And so yeah, I'm really impressed with these comfort grips. I'll leave all this stuff linked down below, but I just wanted to really emphasize the fact that these are super good. I don't know if I've ever spent $22 to improve a handheld PC as much as I did with these. Now, another thing I've enjoyed about the Legion Go controllers is the fact that they are detachable. That does give you a wide variety of different controller options. Now, most of the time I'll just kind of pull them off and use them like Joy-Cons where I'm just kind of holding them like this. But there are also attachments, again from the same Etsy store, that allow you to kind of create your own controller out of it. And I think this is pretty neat too. Now this attachment is a little bit cheaper, it's only $18. And I found that this works pretty well if you are going to be playing, for example, in tabletop mode. So if you want to prop this up on a table, but then have something that's more like a controller experience without having to bring a third-party controller around with you, this is going to be a great solution. I also like that these are a little bit angled in. It makes it more ergonomic. And then when you combine it with those comfort grips that we were talking about earlier, it is a really good experience. And this is also one of the things that made me appreciate the fact that these controllers are kind of hard to get on and off, because once you snap them into place, it does feel like a cohesive controller. It's not like a Joy-Con where you snap it into something and it just kind of feels a little bit loose and wobbly. It's not like that at all. This is like a single piece of controller and it feels pretty great. Okay, I bought one more thing from this Etsy store. Again, I'll have this stuff linked down below. I think this guy's going to get quite a few sales after this video. This thing is called the FPS mode trigger grip. Now, essentially, this is a cap that you'll put on top of the controller when you put it in FPS mode. Now, I like the idea of FPS mode, but there are a lot of things I didn't like about it. Number one is just how it feels in the hand. For example, you have to pull off the right analog stick and there's still going to be a little bit of a nub there. And so when you're squeezing it, you can feel the nub pushing against your hand. So I never really liked that experience. In addition, the sharp angle of that corner is still going to be there. And so it just feels a little bit weird that one side is flat and the other side is round. And it's the opposite of the way that your hand is structured. And so it's always felt a little bit weird. Now, this trigger grip basically removes all of those issues because it covers up that little stick nub, and then also it just has a more rounded experience. It's definitely a fatter feel, like it feels like you're holding something a lot bigger, but all the same, it's pretty neat in that regard. Now, I'm probably the worst person to demonstrate FPS mode in the world. This whole keyboard and mouse thing has never worked for me. I've been trying for 20 plus years. I'm left-handed, and so there's a lot of things that just kind of get in the way when it comes to me using with a mouse and keyboard. And so FPS mode just doesn't make a lot of sense for my hands either. And so unfortunately, I'm not good at using it this way, but I can see the merit in it. And so if you do play your Legion Go in FPS mode, I think it's a really low risk in the fact that it's like $19 to try it out and see if you're going to like it. For me, I love first-person shooter games, but I play them with dual analog sticks. You know, the first Halo really kind of set me on that path, and I've never really gotten off it since then. Okay, the fourth accessory that I bought on Etsy to improve my Legion Go experience is this one. It's called the Lenovo Legion Go Tate Shmup Vertical Portrait Controller Adapter. And that's definitely a mouthful, but I think it's self-explanatory. It's essentially a 3D printed bracket that you can put your Legion Go into and then attach the controllers into it so you can play games vertically. And the quality here is really good. It just slides right into place. It is perfectly form-fitting. It also has a little arm brace on the back so you can flip this up once you slid it into place, and then that will latch it together so that it won't fall out. Now, from a software perspective, we have a couple different approaches. The first would be just to leave it in the regular display orientation, and then when you start up RetroArch to play arcade games, they have Tate mode already within the core options. So you can turn that on and then any vertical game will show up vertically. And one of the benefits of using the Legion Go oriented like this is that you don't have to remap the controls because the controls are still going to stay the same. It's the screen that's rotating, unlike a dedicated handheld where you kind of orient everything over to one side. And so it does make it a much more seamless experience, and I've really appreciated that. And so if you are a fan of vertically oriented shmups on arcade, this is a really great fit right here and well worth the $35 in order to have a more enhanced experience. It's pretty amazing how much of the screen it's going to fill up, and it just looks super awesome. Now, another thing you could do is just rotate the display into portrait mode. After all, this is a native portrait display, and so you're almost playing it naturally at that point. So I've been doing that when I'm playing, for example, DS or 3DS games, because these will have the up and down orientation already set up. And so you can just go into Citra, for example, and then play your favorite 3DS games this way. Now, I would say it's not a perfect experience just because the top screen on 3DS is a little bit wider, and so it does look a little bit disorienting, but all the same, I think it looks a little bit better and plays a little bit better than playing it horizontally. One thing of note, if you do pick this up, there are two different options to choose from. One is called the Bare Device Fit, and the other one is called the Skin and Protector Fit. Now, I got the Bare Device Fit because I wasn't planning on getting a skin, but then I ended up getting a skin, and I learned the hard way that, yeah, it's a little bit too tight if you have the Bare Device one. So if you do plan on getting like the dbrand skin or a screen protector, then definitely get that second option instead. And another thing that I did to try to enhance the experience with the Legion Go is bought some skins. dbrand first announced these back when the Legion Go first came out, and I bought one. It was a little bit slim pickings at the time in terms of design, but there are a bunch of new designs out there, and some of these look pretty great. And it's about $25 or $30 for the skin, depending on the design that you get. And I bought mine a long time ago, but I only recently put it on. And I found that I didn't really want to put a skin on the front. I like the idea of just having it on the back, as you can see right here. In fact, I've been calling this my mullet skin, the idea that this is business up front where you can play your games and then there's a party in the back. And the skins are also sectional, so there's a back piece, and then the top, the bottom, and then also some for your controller. And for me, I've just left it on the back and the bottom. I did have it on the top, but like I mentioned before, I got the smaller adapter for the vertical thing, and so because of that, it scratched up the top, and so I ended up taking off the top part of the skin. Either way, if you do plan on getting a skin, make sure that you get that larger bracket size if you are going to get the vertical adapter as well. I think it's a good fit, it's just a matter of me not following instructions. And I gotta be honest, some of these new dbrand designs are looking pretty good, so I might end up buying one of these and then a new adapter as well. Okay, and finally, the last thing that I've been using in terms of accessories for the Legion Go is this sling bag. This is from tomtoc, and it's 5.5 liters. Now, in full disclosure, they did send this out for me to test out, and initially it was supposed to be for the Steam Deck, but I found that it was a little bit too big for the Steam Deck, like it had just too much space. And I thought to myself, this might actually be a great fit for the Legion Go because of all these accessories that I have. And it turns out that, yeah, this is a great fit. Now, this is not a cheap bag. This thing is $68, although there are quite a few coupons that you can find on Amazon. Either way, I would consider this to be an upgraded bag. In fact, it has quite a few features that I haven't seen on their products before, like these quick release tabs here for the strap. And honestly, in terms of size, it is not that much larger than the original case that comes with the Legion Go. I think the case that comes with it is just fine, but it feels very bulky. This one from tomtoc is also bulky, in fact a little bit bulkier, but it's bulky with a purpose in the fact that everything makes a lot more sense. For example, right on the front we have a zippered pouch that has a bunch of extra sub pockets within it, and so you've got a lot of place to put things right here. We've got a similar setup on the back. This is just one big pocket, so if you want something that's kind of closer to your body, like say a wallet or a passport, you can throw that in here. And then finally on the inside we've got a ton of storage. On the far end we've got like a place for the device itself, but then also we've got a couple other pouches right next to it. I've been detaching the controllers and then putting them within here. On the other side of the inner compartment, we have another pouch. This is also going to be zipped in, so you can put things like that hockey puck or maybe an additional accessory as well. And then finally, even after you've put all that stuff in there, you've got a bunch of space in the center. This can be for like the power plug or maybe some of these other 3D printed grips. And so if you do plan on traveling with the Legion Go, I would definitely say that you should consider something like this tomtoc bag, just because it gives you so many other options to store other things, unlike the big bulky case that comes with the Legion Go. Okay, so those are the accessories I've been using to enhance the experience with the Legion Go, and some of these have been really transformative, especially those 3D printed grips. Now, there have been other things I've been doing on the software side to also improve things. We'll start with the audio. Now, if you remember, the sound profile on the Legion Go is some of the worst that I've ever heard out of the box, especially for a device that's $750. The speakers themselves are upward firing, which is kind of awkward, but then also the sound profile is terrible. Like, it's really tinny, and then also it just lacks a lot of bass as well, and so it's not a pleasant listening experience. Now, for me, I've been doing two different things in tandem to improve the experience. The first is to go into the Realtek audio console. This will be pre-built into the Windows environment on your device, so you don't have to install anything extra. So just search for this within your Windows settings and you will find it pop up. And if you look under the speaker setting, by default, the audio profile will be set to the powerful equalizer setting. And I'm not sure why this is set by default, but you can see that, yeah, it basically removes all of that mid-range and bassy tone. So what I've been doing instead is changing it to the club profile. This will actually boost the mids and the bassy tones a little bit more than you would think, because it's actually a little bit muffled at that point, but we will then enhance it with a third-party software application after this. Anyway, I'll shut up for a moment so you can hear what it's like before and then after. Okay, and so next we're going to use an app called FX Sound. I've used this with a lot of other handheld PCs, especially those from Ioneo, because their sound profiles are always pretty terrible as well. And this one does a great job of boosting all of the important parts, but then also it can create a little bit more spatial audio. And so what I like to do is set it to the gaming profile. And if we combine that with the sound profile that we already set up within the Realtek app, it just kind of balances everything out. Now, obviously this is very personal preference, and I just have a certain sound profile I like to hear when I'm playing a game, but let me go ahead and show you what it's going to sound like before and after. And so yeah, I think that sounds pretty good. I wish that Lenovo had a more enhanced sound profile themselves, but it's pretty easy to set all this stuff up, and I'll leave links to FX Sound down below if you want to check it out. And so here's a quick sample of me playing a game with all these settings configured the way I just explained them in a room that's untreated. And so it's not going to be a perfect experience, but I have the microphone at about the same height that my head is, and so it's probably going to be pretty similar to what you would hear. And yeah, I think that sounds pretty great. So audio for me is basically resolved at that point, to the point where I no longer complain about it. And I think that's pretty good. So now let's move into the visual enhancements that I've been doing with Legion Go. And really the only thing I've been doing to enhance the visuals is integer scaling. You're probably familiar with this term if you watch my other emulation videos, but essentially the idea is that we're going to take an 800p image and then blow it up 4 times to match the 1600p resolution display. And this has actually been implemented within the AMD app with the most recent driver update from back in December. It's been quite a while. Now, this is under the gaming section, and then if you go under display, you will see an option to be able to turn on integer scaling. However, in order to get this to work within the AMD settings, you need to have everything perfectly tuned, and not every game will have these specific settings. One game that does have these settings that works really well is Marvel Spider-Man. To start, you need to make sure that your display settings are set to 1600p resolution, and then within the game, you need to set it to 800p. And then Spider-Man also has the option to set the window mode to exclusive full screen, and that needs to be turned on. And for this game, that's essentially all you have to do. You can change all the other things, like the refresh rate and VSync. All of those are going to be independent of this. But essentially, you need to make sure that the game is running in 800p and that your display is in 1600p and that your game has something like exclusive full screen as an option. And what this does is it'll run the game in 800p, but it'll also integer scale up those pixels. So they'll make them a little bit chunkier looking. And if you like to play retro games, that's always a great thing. But I also don't really mind it when I'm playing a more modern game either. And this is a great solution compared to something like FSR, like those other upscaling tricks, because those will often have graphical artifacts. Instead, this is a very clean image. In fact, it's just basically an integer scale, so it's going to look a lot nicer. And it's also going to make all those images a little bit sharper and crisper as compared to just setting it to 800p in full screen mode, which makes everything look a lot blurrier. So let me give you a few examples. I'm going to pull out my macro lens. So this is a 10x zoom here with my phone directly onto the screen. And as a baseline, we're going to put everything at a low graphical setting. So here's the best case scenario with 1600p. This is going to make everything look nice and crisp, but will demand a lot of power. You can push as much power into it as you can, and you'll only get maybe 30 frames per second, and even then it won't be super consistent. Now the next thing we can do is reduce the resolution. So for example, here is 1200p. It's going to have a little bit of a softer edge to it just because it's not pushing as many pixels. And because it's not a perfect integer scale, it is going to look a little bit off as well. Next, we're going to do 800p, but keeping it in just the regular full screen mode. So any game that you play in 800p is going to look like this. And as you can see, it does look quite a bit softer. And then finally, here we are with 800p with integer scaling turned on. You can see that it's definitely more jagged and pixelated, but it's more balanced as well. And personally, I like this look right here. Obviously, I'm a fan of retro games, and so I don't really mind this. And honestly, when you blow this up to just a regular view, it looks very good also. In particular, if you've ever tried to play a game in 800p and you felt like the text is also blurry, this is not going to happen when you have integer scale turned on. So there are a lot of enhancements here. And here's a quick side-by-side between the two. There's definitely a lower resolution feeling with the 800p and integer scaling on, but I don't know, I kind of like that over the blurriness that you would get when you're just playing it in regular 800p. Now, if you want to further enhance the sharpness of the image, there are a lot of people who like to turn on the Radeon image sharpening. This is also found within the AMD app, and you've got a slider here to adjust the sharpness. A lot of people will play it at 50%, but I've heard others will play it at 100. So let me give you a quick preview of what that'll look like. So here's 800p with integer scaling and 50% sharpening. This is going to further enhance the kind of pixelated look to it, but then also have a little bit of blooming because of that sharpness effect. And so I don't really like the look of this right here. And then finally, here is the same setup, but with 100% sharpening. And to me, I don't really like this effect at all. I know other people like to use this because it makes it feel a lot crisper, but yeah, for me, I like something a little bit more balanced. And so here's a look at all of the different 800p settings. I will release this video in 4K so you can enhance it to make it look a little bit better. But for me personally, yeah, I'm not really sure. I think that the 800p integer looks the best. 800p just on its own looks a little bit blurry, and I don't really like those sharpening effects. Now, I bet integer scaling sounds pretty awesome right about now, and you're probably wondering how you can get it to work with other games. So let me show you how to do that really quickly. It's pretty easy. Now, you are going to need a third-party app. It's called Lossless Scaling. You can find it directly on Steam. It is not free. It's $7, but I think it's well worth it. In addition to the integer scaling that we're going to be doing right here, you can also use it for things like FSR that you can force into a game that doesn't maybe have that support. But then also you can use it for frame generation. And I found that the frame generation on this actually works a little bit better than the tools that are found within like the AMD app. Anyway, if you are looking to do integer scaling on games that don't have that exclusive full screen mode supported, this is what I would recommend trying. First thing you need to do is grab it on Steam and then install it. And then you also need to run this at the same time as your Steam game. So what you'll have to do is go into your program files and then find your Steam folder, then your Steam app folder, and then common folder. Within there, you'll find a list of all your games. Find the one that says lossless scaling, and within that subfolder, you will find the exe file. So go ahead and turn that on, and then within those settings, make sure that the middle section that says scaling type is set to integer. After that, go into Steam or whatever other game launcher you're using, then boot up a game. Make sure that the Legion Go display is set to 1600p, and then under the game settings, set it to 1280 by 800, and then also set it to be Windows and borderless as the window type. And what's likely going to happen is once you set all of those, you're going to get a much smaller screen. So now we're going to use the lossless scaling app to blow that up to fill the rest of the screen up. So go back into the app and then press the button that says scale. It's going to give a 5-second timer countdown, and then at that point go back into your game, and then as long as you're there, once that timer runs down, it's going to blow up that image. And that's it. You have now set up integer scaling properly with games like Cyberpunk 2077. And as you can see here, it looks pretty great. We're running it at 800p with low settings with FSR turned off, and we're still getting an average of about 45 frames per second. I think that's excellent. To give you an example, if you tried to play this at 1600p, you're only going to get about 20 frames per second, if that. And then also if you try to play it with FSR, you will get some better frame rates and the graphics will look a little bit better than integer scaling, but you're going to have all those artifacts. And then also it's still going to be a good 10 frames per second lower than just playing it in 800p with integer scaling. So yes, if you are looking to get the best visual experience that you can, the highest frame rate, while also saving as much battery life, then I would recommend checking out integer scaling because this is one of the great things about that 1600p resolution display. All right, so that's really about it when it comes to the enhancements I've done for the Legion Go to improve it. And I gotta say that most of my biggest concerns have now been addressed. For example, the controls are a lot better with the 3D printed grips. I like the audio profile now too, and I've been playing most of my games in 800p with integer scaling, and it looks excellent. However, to be fair, all three of these enhancements didn't really rely on Lenovo other than like the AMD integer scaling. I'm sure they set that up with AMD. Everything else has been done by the community. And so I think there are other things that Lenovo could do to enhance the Legion Go even more. So that's our last section of this video. So let's talk about that next. The first is that I hope there are some driver updates coming. It's been almost 6 months since the last driver update officially from Lenovo. And so as a result, the integer scaling update that we got back in December is the last one that we've seen. Now, there have been people who have tried to force insert like extra drivers and whatnot, but I found that to be pretty disastrous for me. For example, last month, I tested out the 1X Player GPU. This is an external GPU solution that works with the Lenovo Legion Go. However, this does require updated drivers in order to work. And so when you plug this device in, it's going to give you a prompt to update your drivers. And during the making of that video, that's exactly what I did in order to make it work. And sure enough, yeah, it worked great. I was able to get some great frame rates using games that are pretty hard to run even on ultra settings. However, once I unplugged it, I found that I was no longer able to access the AMD Link app. I was no longer able to change integer scaling or anything else like that because the new drivers weren't compatible with Legion Go. So then what I had to do is uninstall all of the graphical drivers, going into safe mode and doing all that stuff. And then once I had those all disabled, I had to go back and get the official drivers and install all of that. That took me several hours to get it all up and running. And I think that if you do want to use an external GPU, you're kind of in this weird place where if you want to use it, you have to use new drivers. But then if you want to use it in handheld mode, you're going to be kind of screwed. And so those are the kind of updates that I expect from an OEM like Lenovo. And like I said, the last driver update was back in December, and so I think it's long overdue. Another thing I'd like to see are official solutions to some of the things that the community has figured out on their own. For example, the audio profile, I think that could still be tweaked within the software. And then also, we're still waiting for new controllers. It's been 6 months, but we haven't heard a peep about that. I also would love to see something built into the Legion Space app like the lossless scaling app, where we can just go and press that in order to turn on integer scaling. I think it'd make the whole process a lot easier. Another thing I would like to see is a proper 120 Hz setting within the display settings. Right now, you can just toggle between 60 and 144 Hz, but for me in particular, I'd love to have 120. And that's because I'd be able to use black frame insertion with 60 Hz games like retro games. And unfortunately, even if you use custom resolution utility right now to build out your own 120 Hz profile, when you switch it over, you get this really gnarly screen like this. Now, this does lead me to think that maybe this screen is just not possible of displaying at 120 Hz, but man, I really wish that Lenovo would either try it themselves or at least make a statement to say that no, we're just going to keep it at 60 and 144. This panel is not capable of doing 120. Another thing I mentioned in my review video is that I wish there was some sort of charging indicator. When you first plug the device in, when it's powered off, you will get a flash that will say whatever the battery percentage is at, and it'll say that it's charging. But after that, you will get no other indication, no red light, no light that turns off, anything else like that. The only way that you can check to see where the battery level is or whether or not it's at 100% is to unplug it and then plug it back in. And I feel like with a device that has so many LED lights on it between these sticks and then the top button, there must be a way that they can power that on to show you that it's charging and then maybe turn off when it's done. And it's just a very simple thing, but it's kind of crazy that they still haven't addressed it 6 months later. And then finally, this one is the ultimate nitpick, but it totally bothers me that up in the power saving option within the Legion Space Quick Menu app, the G is below the rest of the word. And this is just a font or scaling issue, and I feel like they should just change this. Use a different font, use a different size, whatever it needs to be, but I don't like that it says power saving G. Okay, I'm just being nitpicky at this point, so let's start wrapping things up and talk about how I feel about the Legion Go today. And I have to say that I like it a lot more than I did 6 months ago. I remember when I made that first video, back when it first came out, and I remember saying in the conclusion was that I felt like I would return this device if I didn't do this for a living, that I needed to keep the Legion Go around in order to do testing and size comparisons, things like that. But if it was just a Joe Schmo going off the street and buying a device, I would have probably returned it because I didn't feel like it warranted the $750 that I paid for it. And so I would say that the best compliment I can give about this device today is that it no longer feels like a business expense. I actually find myself picking it up and actually playing it more than I would. And a lot of it has to do with those enhancements. The fact that we have those 3D printed grips that actually makes me enjoy playing this device means that it no longer feels like work when I'm actually playing this device. And so that's probably one of my favorite things about it, is that there have been so many community solutions out there and enough people rallying behind this device in the first place that I now think that it actually is pretty good for its price. Now at $750, it is hard to say that it is actually $100 better than the highest tier Steam Deck, but all the same, I can see why there are people who want to have a Windows device that also is going to have a large screen and detachable controllers. It gives them a lot of extra options that the Steam Deck doesn't. And so if any of those factors mean a lot to you, like having Windows out of the box or having a larger screen or being able to play it in tabletop mode, then I do see a space for the Legion Go. And I think that this special space that the Legion Go occupies right now is going to be there for quite some time. After all, the MSI Claw came and went at this point, and I don't think that was a big competition against the Legion Go anyway. And then the Ally, which I would say is probably the main competition in the Windows space, is still going to have that smaller 7-inch screen. And so if you're still looking for a large screen device, the Legion Go is the one to get. Now for my own personal tastes, I definitely prefer both the Steam Deck as well as the Ally over the Legion Go, but I can see where there are going to be people who prefer the Legion Go. It's got a lot of great options that the others don't, and I think that 1600p display, especially with integer scaling, does make it a really compelling buy as well. Anyway, let me know what you think about the Legion Go in the comments down below. Did you pick one up, but did you return it? Are you still playing it? What do you like about it, or what do you not like about it? As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.